understand. What should be the proper mix of cultural and economic backgrounds and also achievement at an Iowa City School District elementary school? Or should that matter at all? And Carla Cook, we'll start with you.
Well, I obviously would love to see a mix of all economic levels, of all cultural levels. I think we can learn from, all students can learn from every other student. But I'm not sure that I would redistrict in order to achieve that. I don't think that that should be the goal, is to say we have to have 3 people from India and 2 people from France, and, you know, to make a mixture like that. I do think that every one of the schools is good, and I think that when we redistrict, we want to continue to be able to say that about every school, that they all offer excellent programs, that they all offer children what they need when they're learning, and as long as we can say that, the schools are appropriate.
I think that having a strong mix of cultural and economic different background students and a mix of achievement does make for a rich school. However, I don't support using that as a primary criteria for redistricting. I think that one of the greatest things that we can do in planning for schools and for supporting families is having a close connection where there's access to that school for the family so that they feel a part of that community. I think using only distance or using transportation as the way to move students around is not something that is family friendly. However, when we have a chance and are drawing new boundaries for schools, that is one of the factors that we can consider when we're doing new boundaries, as long as it's within a close range of the attendance area.
I think I'll try this.
I agree that a nice mix would be a good thing to see, but I also agree that this is not a single reason to redistrict kids. When redistricting, you need to look at the whole picture and, of course, keep in mind what your goals are. And I think, though, that the ultimate goal in our district is, regardless of the cultural, economic achievement mix in any school, what can we do in that school to make sure that every child has an opportunity to excel?
I think in a perfect world, we'd be able to attain, the balance between economic, cultural, and achievement across our schools, but the world isn't necessarily perfect, and nor is Iowa City, as much as I like to think it is. The factors that we are talking about are just factors that need to be considered when you enter into a discussion about redistricting. They're no more important than any of the other factors, and there's a lot of other factors that I think are vastly more important. Like Phil said, you don't want to be busing people a long distance, and certainly not busing people past one school to get to the next like we've done in the past. As well as the concerns for safety. There's also heightened concerns about being sure that there's stability in a child's education. There's been a lot of talk about the desire to revisit the redistricting year after year after year. Well, families and children deserve some sort of stability in this process. Yes, there's times that will come up and we need to constantly talk about the issue, but constantly redoing things and constantly moving people around I don't think is going to serve any benefit, especially if we're only talking about those factors solely. Now, if there's larger things, yes, then those come into play.
I agree with some of the comments that the other candidates made about it not being the only factor that you need to consider, but I do remember when I was teaching that I had classrooms where if I had a really good mix of students, they did achieve better by learning from each other, and not only in the academic sense but also in the social sense as well. I don't know that that's the most important thing in the classroom, but I do know that to have students that feel comfortable and safe and have a stable environment, like what was mentioned before, is a very important factor. So I am very aware of how parents need to be a part of their students' education. The family resource centers we have in our schools help them feel better about being a part of the school family. And I am not a fan of having the buses taking the students past the school that's closest to their homes just to balance out somebody else's mix. So I do think we can look at that and try to make it better for those students that need that stability.
How do you propose, or do you propose, to achieve socioeconomic balance in our elementary schools in a community where we have racial segregation, limited funds, and strong allegiance to the concept of neighborhood schools? And this question starts with Sally.
I think we touched on this issue when we talked earlier about how necessary it was to have a cultural and an economic and an achievement mix in the schools. And as far as socioeconomic mix, I think it is something that we achieve to do, that we strive to have that balance. However, I don't think that that is the driving concern behind redistricting. I'm not in favor of busing kids across the district in order to change the socioeconomic mix. I think that there are other factors that we've discussed, such as the community feel of the schools and the neighborhood feel, that are much more important. And I think the issue becomes providing the resources so that whatever the socioeconomic status is of the students in the school, they are receiving the opportunities that they need to excel.
Like we talked about before, I think the socioeconomic balance is a factor that needs to be talked about. It's not the factor. There's lots of factors that come into play when you're talking about the composition of any school or a number of schools. It's the cultural aspect, it's the achievement aspect, it's all the things we talked about before in the previous answer. And so, you know, I really don't have much different things to say, so I don't want to waste your time, but it's something that needs to be discussed and looked at. But again, you know, not at the cost of all the other factors, and certainly not a factor that's going to trump all the other ones that come into play.
I also think we touched on this on the other question, and I think it's a good thing to look at and to think about, but I'm not sure that we can make any purposeful changes in that regard if we're going to try to have kids bused from one place to another all the time. I think what happened in our district that has made this such an issue is because we had the No Child Left Behind come into play, and we have SINA schools, schools in need of assistance. And when that happened, people panicked, and a lot of students left the schools that they thought were not as good as what they should be. So we had school populations being a little unbalanced because of that regard too, because not everyone could just pick up and move to another school. But I do think that it's something that we can get changed, and hopefully that we will be able to get a waiver from the state so that we won't have to have those SINA schools anymore, and hopefully the neighborhood will be more balanced in just having the people that live around that school attend that school.
I think I said earlier that I wouldn't bus for cultural reasons, or I would not bus for socioeconomic reasons either. But I'd like to see us try something innovative that might get the students to mix with each other on certain occasions, perhaps 4 times a year, partner up 2 schools and let them experience each other's programs, perhaps put on some kind of a play, a carnival, a track meet, you know, something where you could get 2 schools together and they could meet with the other students and find out that they're just students like they are, and they have the same concerns and the same goals. And I think that would be a way for everyone to learn. It would let us use our brains, our talents here in town to start something new rather than just complain about something old.
I think there are a lot of factors that have affected the isolations that you were mentioning. Certainly, the questions before about our relationships with cities and with planning can have an effect on that for a longer-term plan. However, I think for supporting schools and families, it's about how we support families to provide the best education that we can. And we do certain programs within schools, but I also think there is lots of room to be creative, to look at other innovative ways to reach families, to offer different programs. And it's about how we are differentiating between schools, that the needs of the schools are not all the same. So always applying the same rules to everyone is not always in the best interest.